The woman my daughter hired to care for me smiled as she adjusted my pillows, but I caught her photographing my medication bottles when she thought I wasn't looking. For 3 weeks I'd been told I was paranoid, that my mind was playing tricks on me. Then I found the hidden camera in my bedroom smoke detector, and everything I suspected became horrifyingly real. My own daughter had turned my home into a surveillance operation, and I was about to discover why. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Patricia Caldwell, and until recently, I believed my daughter Vanessa loved me. I'm 73 years old, a retired literature professor who spent 40 years teaching Shakespeare and Austen to college students who mostly pretended to care. My husband Daniel died 6 years ago from pancreatic cancer, leaving me alone in the sprawling Victorian house we'd renovated together in Portland, Maine. The house had been our dream project, with its wraparound porch, original hardwood floors, and the library Daniel built for me with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. After he died, everyone expected me to sell it, to move into something smaller and more manageable. But this house held every memory of our life together, and I wasn't ready to let go. I managed fine on my own for years. Sure, I moved a bit slower than I used to, and sometimes I forgot where I put my reading glasses, but my mind was sharp. I still read voraciously, volunteered at the local literacy center twice a week, and maintained my garden with the same precision I'd once applied to grading term papers. My life had purpose and routine, and I was content with the quiet dignity of my independence. Vanessa visited once a month, always on the second Sunday. She lived 2 hours away in Boston, working as a corporate attorney for some prestigious firm whose name she dropped frequently but whose actual work remained vague to me. She'd married Trevor, a hedge fund manager, 10 years ago, and they lived in a penthouse overlooking the harbor. No children yet, though Vanessa insisted they were waiting for the right time. At 42, I wondered privately if that time would ever come, but I kept my concerns to myself. Our relationship had always been cordial rather than warm, respectful rather than close. She was Daniel's daughter from his first marriage, and though I'd raised her from age 7, there remained an invisible barrier between us that neither of us knew how to cross. The trouble started 3 months ago during one of her monthly visits. I'd been in my garden, pruning the rose bushes that bordered the back fence, when I felt a sudden wave of dizziness. The world tilted sideways, and the next thing I knew, I was on the ground with dirt under my fingernails and Vanessa's horrified face hovering above me. She'd arrived early, found me unconscious among the roses, and called an ambulance before I could protest. The emergency room doctor said it was likely a minor stroke, though the tests were inconclusive. My blood pressure was elevated, he said, and at my age I needed to be more careful. He recommended reducing stress, monitoring my medication more closely, and perhaps considering some help around the house. I assured him I was perfectly capable of managing my own affairs, thanked him for his concern, and went home determined to prove everyone wrong. But Vanessa had other ideas. She began calling every other day instead of weekly, her voice tight with barely concealed anxiety. How was I feeling? Was I taking my medications properly? Had I experienced any more dizzy spells? I assured her repeatedly that I was fine, that the episode had been a fluke, that I was being careful. But her calls became more frequent, her questions more pointed, and her tone increasingly skeptical of my answers. Then came the visit that changed everything. Vanessa arrived on a Wednesday, unannounced, with Trevor in tow and matching expressions of grave concern. They sat me down in my own living room like I was a child about to be disciplined and informed me they'd been talking to my doctors, reviewing my medical records, and consulting with elder care specialists. The conclusion they'd reached, delivered with the clinical detachment of a corporate presentation, was that I could no longer live alone safely. I was stunned into silence. Behind my back, my daughter had been building a case against my independence, gathering evidence like a prosecutor preparing for trial. She had documentation of the stroke, printouts of research about elderly fall risks, statistics about medication errors in seniors living alone, and a folder thick with information about assisted living facilities in the area. The betrayal burned in my chest like acid. Not just that she'd gone behind my back, but that she'd involved Trevor, my doctors, and apparently half the medical establishment in Portland in her campaign to prove I was incompetent. When I finally found my voice, it came out colder than I'd intended. I told them absolutely not. This was my home, the house Daniel and I built together, and I wasn't leaving it because of one dizzy spell and some paranoid catastrophizing. I was 73, not 93, and I was fully capable of managing my own life. Vanessa's face flushed with frustration. She argued that I was being unreasonable, that I didn't understand the risks, that she was only trying to protect me. Trevor sat beside her nodding along like a puppet, occasionally interjecting legal-sounding phrases about liability and duty of care that made me want to throw them both out. The argument escalated until I was shouting, something I rarely did, telling them to leave my house and not come back until they were ready to treat me like an adult instead of an incompetent child. Vanessa left in tears, Trevor tight-lipped and disapproving behind her, and I spent the rest of the evening shaking with anger and hurt. 3 days of silence followed. No calls, no texts, nothing. I told myself I was relieved, that I needed space from her suffocating concern. But truthfully, the silence hurt more than the argument had. On the 4th day, Vanessa called with an olive branch. She apologized for overstepping, admitted she'd been heavy-handed in her approach, and proposed a compromise. Instead of moving into assisted living, what if I accepted some help at home? Just someone to come in a few times a week, help with heavy chores, make sure I was eating properly, provide some companionship. She'd already found someone perfect, she said. A lovely woman named Carol Jensen who came highly recommended and specialized in companion care for independent seniors. I was so relieved that Vanessa was speaking to me again, so grateful for what seemed like respect for my autonomy, that I agreed without much thought. It seemed reasonable enough. Someone to help with the vacuuming and the grocery shopping wouldn't compromise my independence. If anything, it would prove I could accept help gracefully and put Vanessa's mind at ease. Carol arrived the following Monday morning at 9 o'clock sharp. She was younger than I expected, probably in her mid-40s, with short auburn hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a brisk, professional manner. She wore scrubs decorated with cheerful cartoon flowers, and carried a large tote bag that she set down in my entryway with a businesslike efficiency. Her smile was pleasant but didn't quite reach her eyes, and her handshake was firm to the point of being slightly uncomfortable. That first day, she was everything Vanessa had promised. Helpful but not intrusive, respectful of my space, willing to follow my lead about what I needed. She cleaned the kitchen, did 3 loads of laundry, and made a wonderful chicken soup for lunch that we ate together while discussing gardening techniques. She asked thoughtful questions about my roses, complimented the house, and shared amusing stories about other clients she'd worked with. By the time she left at 3 o'clock, I was convinced that perhaps this arrangement would work out after all. But small things began bothering me almost immediately. The way Carol always positioned herself where she could see what I was doing, even when she was supposedly focused on her own tasks. How she asked detailed questions about my routine, my friends, my finances, always casual but somehow a bit too interested. The way she'd pick up my mail and flip through it before handing it to me, commenting on bills or correspondence in a way that felt invasive. Then there were the phone calls. Carol would step out onto the porch several times during her visits, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in low tones I couldn't quite make out. When I asked who she was talking to, she'd say it was her agency checking in or another client confirming an appointment. Reasonable enough, except something about her body language during those calls suggested otherwise. She stood with her back to the house, one arm wrapped around herself, speaking rapidly in a tone that sounded more like reporting than chatting. The medication incident happened during her 2nd week. I kept my prescriptions in a cabinet in the kitchen, organized in a weekly pill organizer that I filled every Sunday evening. It was a system that worked perfectly well for me. One morning, I walked into the kitchen to find Carol photographing my medication bottles with her phone. She startled when she saw me, quickly lowering the phone and explaining that she was just making a list to ensure I wasn't running low on anything. But the explanation felt rehearsed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she'd been doing something she shouldn't. I mentioned it to Vanessa during our next phone call, trying to sound casual rather than accusatory. Vanessa dismissed my concern immediately. Carol was just being thorough, she said. It was actually good that she was keeping track of my medications since I'd been so resistant to help in that area. The dismissal stung, but I let it go, telling myself I was overreacting. But I wasn't overreacting. Over the following days, I noticed more strange behaviors. Carol would arrive early sometimes, letting herself in with the key I'd given her before I was fully dressed, catching me in my bathrobe and apologizing profusely while her eyes scanned my bedroom. She'd reorganize things in ways I hadn't asked for, moving items and then watching to see if I noticed, as if testing my memory. Once, I caught her going through the papers on my desk in the library, the room I'd explicitly told her I preferred to clean myself. She claimed she was just looking for a notepad to write down a grocery list, but my notepads were clearly visible on the kitchen counter where I always kept them. The breaking point came 3 weeks into Carol's employment. I woke up in the middle of the night needing water, and noticed a faint red light blinking in the corner of my bedroom ceiling. It was coming from the smoke detector, but smoke detectors don't blink red unless they're malfunctioning or their batteries are low. I stood on my bed, something my daughter would have had a heart attack seeing.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
And examined the device more closely. That's when I saw it. A tiny lens, barely visible, embedded in the smoke detector's casing. A camera. Someone had put a camera in my bedroom, pointed directly at my bed. My hands shook as I climbed down. My heart hammered so hard I thought I might have another stroke right there. Someone was watching me. In my own bedroom, in my most private space, someone had installed a camera to spy on me. The violation was so complete, so shocking that I couldn't process it at first. I sat on the edge of my bed in the darkness, trying to understand who would do this and why. And then I knew. Carol. It had to be Carol. She was the only person besides Vanessa who'd been in my house regularly, the only one with opportunity. But why? What possible reason could a caregiver have for surveilling her client? Unless she wasn't really a caregiver at all. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I lay in bed, acutely aware of the camera watching me, feeling exposed and vulnerable in a way I'd never experienced before. As dawn broke, I began searching the rest of the house. I found 2 more cameras. One in the living room, hidden in the decorative clock on the mantel. Another in the kitchen, tucked into the ventilation hood above the stove. Someone had turned my entire home into a surveillance operation. I called Vanessa immediately, my voice shaking with anger and fear. I told her about the cameras, about Carol's suspicious behavior, about the violation of my privacy. I expected shock, outrage, promises to call the police immediately. What I got instead was silence. Long, heavy silence that told me everything I needed to know. When Vanessa finally spoke, her voice was careful, measured, the tone she used in court when choosing her words precisely. She asked me to calm down, said we should discuss this rationally, suggested that perhaps I was confused about what I'd seen. The cameras I was describing sounded like standard smoke detector lights, she said. And wasn't it possible I was misinterpreting Carol's helpfulness as something sinister? The gaslighting was so blatant, so insulting to my intelligence that I actually laughed. A harsh, bitter sound that surprised us both. I told her I knew exactly what I'd seen, that I wasn't confused or paranoid or suffering from dementia, and that if she couldn't be honest with me, I had nothing more to say to her. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were still shaking, but now it was from rage rather than fear. My own daughter. Vanessa had done this. She'd hired Carol not as a caregiver, but as a spy. She'd planted cameras in my house to watch me, to gather evidence, to build her case that I was incompetent and needed to be removed from my home. The betrayal was absolute. Not just that she'd violated my privacy so completely, but that she'd looked me in the eye, accepted my trust, and used it to destroy my autonomy. Every kind word, every expression of concern, every promise to respect my independence had been a lie designed to get me to accept surveillance in my own home. Carol arrived at her usual time that morning, cheerful and oblivious, asking how I'd slept and what I wanted for breakfast. I looked at this woman who'd been pretending to care for me while actually spying on me, and I felt my remaining self-control snap. I told her to get out. Right now, immediately, and never come back. Her face went through a rapid series of expressions: surprise, confusion, and then something that looked almost like relief, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. She didn't ask why or try to argue. She just gathered her things, grabbed her tote bag, and left without a word. That confirmed everything. A real caregiver would have been confused, would have asked what she'd done wrong, would have tried to understand. Carol just left because she'd been caught and she knew it. After she was gone, I removed all 3 cameras and put them in a box. Evidence, though I wasn't sure yet what I planned to do with them. I sat in Daniel's library, surrounded by books that had given me comfort my entire life, and tried to understand how my daughter could have done this to me. The phone rang constantly throughout the day. Vanessa, over and over, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. We needed to talk, she said. I was overreacting, she said. She was only trying to protect me, she said. I didn't answer. I needed time to think, to process, to figure out what came next. By evening, I'd made a decision. I couldn't stay in this house, not right now, not knowing how thoroughly my privacy had been violated. I needed space to think, somewhere Vanessa couldn't reach me, couldn't manipulate me, couldn't gaslight me into believing I was the one being unreasonable. I packed a small suitcase with clothes and essentials, took the box of cameras, and left the house that Daniel and I had built together. I had some money saved, enough for a modest hotel for a while. I'd figure out the rest later. The budget inn on Route 1 wasn't much to look at. Faded paint, a flickering neon sign, and rooms that smelled like industrial cleaner and old cigarette smoke despite the prominent no-smoking signs. But it was anonymous and affordable, and right now that was all I needed. The clerk, a tired-looking woman probably in her 60s, barely glanced at me as she took my credit card and handed me a key to room 114. The room was exactly what I expected. 2 double beds with floral bedspreads that had seen better days, a television bolted to the dresser, and a bathroom with tiles that might have been white once upon a time. But it was clean enough, and more importantly, it was mine. No cameras, no spies, no daughter pretending to care while actually plotting against me. I sat on the edge of the bed and finally let myself cry. Not just about the cameras or Carol or the betrayal, but about everything I'd lost. My home didn't feel safe anymore. My daughter's love had turned out to be conditional at best, manipulative at worst. The independence I'd fought so hard to maintain was under siege from the one person who should have been protecting it. After the tears stopped, I felt something else. Anger. Pure, clarifying anger that burned away the hurt and the confusion. Vanessa thought she could treat me like an incompetent child, like someone whose autonomy didn't matter, like a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. She thought wrong. I'd spent 40 years teaching students to think critically, to question authority, to stand up for what was right. It was time I took my own lessons to heart. The next morning, I went to a coffee shop with free Wi-Fi and began researching. Elder abuse, I discovered, wasn't just physical harm or financial exploitation. It included violation of privacy, manipulation, and using surveillance to control or intimidate. What Vanessa had done had a name. It was illegal in the state of Maine, and there were resources available for people in my situation. I found a legal aid society that specialized in elder rights and made an appointment for the following day. I documented everything I could remember about Carol's behavior, Vanessa's pressure to move, the discovery of the cameras. I downloaded the photographs from my phone showing the hidden devices. I was building my own case now, not against my competency, but against those who'd violated my rights. The lawyer, a sharp young woman named Rebecca Torres, listened to my story without interruption. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and shook her head slowly. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said, "what your daughter did is absolutely illegal. Installing surveillance devices in someone's home without their knowledge or consent is a serious crime. The fact that she's your daughter doesn't give her the right to violate your privacy this way." The validation felt like oxygen after nearly drowning. Someone believed me. Someone understood that I wasn't crazy or paranoid, that I'd been genuinely violated. Rebecca outlined my options. I could file a police report, pursue criminal charges, seek a restraining order, or handle it civilly through family court. Each path had implications, and none of them were easy. But for the first time since finding those cameras, I felt like I had some control back. That evening, sitting in my depressing hotel room, I made 2 decisions. First, I would confront Vanessa, but on my terms and with legal representation. I wouldn't let her gaslight me or manipulate the narrative. Second, I would find out why she'd done this. There had to be more to this story than just an overprotective daughter worried about falls and medication management. The level of surveillance, the calculated deception suggested something darker. My phone buzzed with another voicemail from Vanessa. Her tone had shifted from desperate to angry. She accused me of being dramatic, of abandoning my responsibilities, of worrying Trevor and her friends with my erratic behavior. The psychological manipulation was so transparent now that I almost admired the craftsmanship of it. She was trying to make me doubt myself, to make me feel guilty for her actions, to paint my justified anger as evidence of mental instability. It wouldn't work this time. As I lay in the uncomfortable hotel bed that night, listening to trucks rumble past on Route 1, I thought about the life I'd had just a few months ago. Quiet, independent content. I thought about the life Vanessa had tried to force on me, surveilled, controlled, eventually institutionalized. And I thought about the life I was going to fight for, one where I had autonomy, dignity, and truth. I didn't know yet how this would end. I didn't know if I'd ever be able to repair my relationship with Vanessa, or if it was already too broken to fix. I didn't know if I'd feel safe in my own home again. But I knew this. I wasn't going down without a fight. Patricia Caldwell, retired literature professor, widow, and apparently victim of elder surveillance abuse, was about to teach her daughter a lesson she'd never forget. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love us most are the ones who hurt us worst. Sometimes the greatest act of self-preservation is refusing to accept someone else's version of reality. And sometimes, when everything falls apart, the only choice is to stand in the rubble and rebuild something better from the broken pieces. My fall from grace wasn't over yet. But neither was my story. The meeting with Vanessa took place 6 days after I discovered the cameras, in Rebecca Torres's office rather than anywhere my daughter could control the environment. Rebecca had insisted on neutral ground, and I was grateful for her strategic thinking. The office was small but professional, with law books lining one wall and framed degrees on another. I arrived 15 minutes early, my hands clutching a folder containing printed photographs of the cameras, Carol's employment contract that Vanessa had provided, and a timeline of events I'd meticulously documented. Vanessa arrived exactly on time, dressed in one of her power suits, navy blue with subtle pinstripes, her hair pulled back in the severe bun she wore for court appearances. Trevor wasn't with her, which surprised me until I realized she probably wanted to handle this privately, away from witnesses who might later testify about what was said. She was, after all, a lawyer, and lawyers understood the importance of controlling information. She stopped short when she saw Rebecca sitting beside me, her expression flickering from surprise to calculation to something that might have been fear. She hadn't expected me to bring legal representation. She'd probably imagined this would be another private conversation where she could talk circles around me, twist my words, make me doubt my own perceptions. Mrs. Caldwell has asked me to be present for this conversation, Rebecca said calmly, gesturing to the chair across from us. Please sit down. Vanessa sat slowly, her litigation instincts clearly warring with her personal involvement. Her eyes met mine for the first time, and I saw a complex mixture of emotions there. Anger definitely, defensiveness, but also something that looked almost like hurt, as if I'd betrayed her by refusing to accept her surveillance without complaint. Mother, she began, her voice tight with controlled emotion. This has gotten completely out of hand. You've been hiding in some hotel for almost a week, you won't return my calls, and now you've hired a lawyer like I'm some kind of criminal. I installed surveillance cameras in my home without my knowledge or consent, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. In Maine, that's exactly what makes someone a criminal. Vanessa's jaw tightened. Those cameras were for your safety. After your stroke, I needed to make sure you were okay, that you weren't falling, that you were taking your medications properly. Any reasonable person would understand that I was acting out of concern. Any reasonable person would have asked permission first, Rebecca interjected smoothly. Would have discussed the option openly and respected Mrs. Caldwell's right to consent or refuse. Covert surveillance is a violation of privacy rights, regardless of the supposed good intentions behind it. Vanessa turned her lawyer gaze on Rebecca, the look she probably used to intimidate opposing counsel. And you are? Rebecca Torres, representing Mrs. Caldwell in this matter. I specialize in elder law and protection of senior citizens' rights. The term senior citizens made Vanessa flinch slightly, as if the reality of my age was something she preferred not to acknowledge directly. She turned back to me, her expression softening in a way that felt calculated rather than genuine. Mom, please. Can we talk about this privately? Just the two of us, without lawyers and formal accusations. We're family. The word family hung in the air like an accusation of its own. For 73 years, I'd believed that family meant unconditional love, mutual respect, and basic honesty. Vanessa had taught me that family could also mean manipulation, control, and betrayal dressed up as concern. "We're talking now," I said. "And I want Rebecca here because I don't trust you to be honest with me anymore." The words landed like a slap. Vanessa's face went red, then pale, emotions crossing her features too quickly to name. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its professional polish and carried the raw edge of genuine anger. "You don't trust me? I've spent months trying to protect you, trying to make sure you're safe, and you don't trust me? Do you have any idea what it's been like watching you struggle alone in that huge house, knowing that any day I could get a call that you'd fallen down the stairs or forgotten to turn off the stove, or mixed up your medications? Then you should have talked to me about your concerns," I replied. "Not gone behind my back to my doctors, not pressured me to move into assisted living, and definitely not hired a spy to watch me in my own home." Carol wasn't a spy. She was a professional caregiver with excellent credentials. Rebecca slid a paper across the table. "This is Carol Jensen's employment contract. According to the terms, which you negotiated and signed on behalf of your mother without her knowledge of the full scope, Carol was required to provide daily reports about Mrs. Caldwell's activities, photograph any concerns about the home environment, and alert you immediately to any behaviors deemed problematic. That's not caregiving, Miss Caldwell. That's surveillance." Vanessa stared at the contract, and I saw something crack in her composure. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the paper, scanning the terms she'd agreed to. When she looked up, there were tears in her eyes, but I couldn't tell if they were genuine or tactical. "I was scared," she said, her voice breaking. "When I found you unconscious in the garden, I thought you were dead. Do you understand that? I thought I'd lost you just like I lost Dad. And the doctor said you'd had a stroke, that you were at high risk for another one, that living alone was dangerous. What was I supposed to do? Just wait for the next emergency call?" The mention of Daniel was a low blow, and we both knew it. She was trying to connect her behavior to my grief, to the shared loss that bonded us. But Daniel had never treated me like an incompetent child. Even in his final weeks, ravaged by cancer and barely able to move, he'd respected my autonomy and my right to make my own decisions. "You were supposed to treat me like an adult," I said quietly, "like someone capable of assessing my own risks and making my own choices. You were supposed to respect me." "I do respect you." "No, Vanessa. You don't. Respect doesn't involve hidden cameras and fake caregivers, and building a case for incompetence behind someone's back. That's not respect. That's control." The room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the muffled sounds of traffic outside. Vanessa looked down at her hands, at the wedding ring she wore that probably cost more than my first car, and I saw her struggle with something. When she looked up again, her expression had changed. The lawyer mask was gone, replaced by something raw and desperate. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. "Something I should have told you weeks ago." My stomach tightened with apprehension. Rebecca leaned forward slightly, her pen poised over her legal pad. "The house," Vanessa continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "The Victorian. It's worth almost $2 million now. The Portland real estate market has exploded, and houses like yours are in incredibly high demand." I felt the first stirrings of understanding, cold and unwelcome. "Go on." "Trevor and we've had some financial difficulties. His firm made some bad investments and we're leveraged beyond what we should be. The penthouse mortgage alone is crushing us, and we have other debts. Significant debts." Rebecca's pen moved steadily across her notepad. "How significant?" Vanessa closed her eyes. $3 million. Maybe more. The number hung in the air like smoke. $3 million in debt, and they'd been living like royalty, maintaining appearances while drowning financially. And I owned a house worth $2 million that I lived in alone. "You wanted me declared incompetent," I said slowly, the pieces falling into place with horrible clarity. "So you could become my guardian, sell my house, and use the money to pay off your debts." Vanessa's silence was confirmation enough. Rebecca's pen stopped moving. "Mrs. Caldwell," Rebecca said carefully, "this constitutes financial elder abuse. If your daughter was documenting supposed incompetence with the intent to gain guardianship for financial benefit, that's a serious criminal offense." "It wasn't like that," Vanessa said quickly, desperately. "I wasn't trying to steal from you, Mom. I was trying to protect you and solve our problems at the same time. You don't need that huge house. You'd be happier somewhere smaller, safer, with people around. We could sell the Victorian, set up a trust for your care in a beautiful assisted living facility, and yes, use some of the remaining funds to stabilize our financial situation. Everyone would benefit. Everyone except me, I said. I'd lose my home, my independence, and my autonomy so you could maintain your lifestyle. That's not fair. Isn't it? You put cameras in my bedroom, Vanessa. You hired someone to spy on me. You went to my doctors behind my back. You built an entire case to prove I was incompetent so you could take control of my life and my assets. And now you're sitting here telling me it was all for my own good? Vanessa stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You're twisting everything. Yes, I need help financially, but that doesn't mean I don't genuinely care about your safety. Both things can be true. Can they? Because from where I'm sitting, the surveillance started right around the time your financial troubles became critical. The pressure to move increased as your debts mounted. Carol was hired when you needed documented evidence of incompetence. That's not coincidence, Vanessa. That's calculation. My daughter stood there, her expensive suit and perfect hair and lawyer composure all crumbling around her like a facade with nothing substantial behind it. For a moment I saw the 7-year-old girl Daniel had introduced me to all those years ago, scared and defensive after her mother left, building walls to protect herself from being hurt again. But that sympathy lasted only a moment before I remembered the cameras, the lies, the systematic violation of everything I held dear. I think we're done here, I said. Mom, please. Mrs. Caldwell, Rebecca said, addressing Vanessa formally, my client will be filing a police report regarding the illegal surveillance. I strongly suggest you retain your own legal counsel. Any further contact should go through me. Vanessa looked between us, her face a mask of disbelief. You're actually going to press charges? Against your own daughter? You actually installed cameras in my bedroom to build a case for stealing my house, I replied. So yes, I'm going to press charges against my own daughter. She left without another word, her heels clicking sharply against the tile floor, the door closing behind her with a soft click that felt far more final than a slam would have. After she was gone, I sat in the silence of Rebecca's office and felt the weight of what had just happened settle over me like a heavy blanket. My daughter had tried to institutionalize me for money. The surveillance, the fake concern, the caregiver spy, it had all been a calculated scheme to gain control of my assets by having me declared incompetent. The betrayal was so complete, so mercenary that I almost couldn't process it. Are you all right? Rebecca asked gently. I don't know, I admitted. I knew it was bad, but I didn't expect this. Financial exploitation of elderly parents is unfortunately more common than most people realize. The assets involved, combined with the power dynamics of the parent-child relationship, create opportunities for abuse that many people can't resist. She's Daniel's daughter, I said quietly. I raised her. I loved her. How did we get here? Rebecca had no answer for that, and I didn't expect one. Some questions didn't have satisfying answers. Sometimes people just made terrible choices that broke the hearts of those who loved them. The police took my report that afternoon. A detective named Maria Okonkwo, a woman probably in her late 40s with warm eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, listened to my story with the kind of attention that suggested she'd heard similar tales before. She photographed the cameras I'd removed, took copies of all my documentation, and assured me they'd investigate thoroughly. These cases can be complicated, she warned me. Family dynamics make prosecution difficult, and defendants often claim they were acting in the victim's best interest. But what your daughter did was clearly illegal, and we'll pursue it appropriately. I returned to my hotel room that evening feeling emotionally wrung out. The confrontation with Vanessa had been necessary but exhausting, and the revelation about her financial motives had added another layer of hurt to the betrayal. I ordered takeout from a Chinese restaurant down the street, and ate it mechanically while watching the news without really seeing it. My phone rang around 8. An unknown number which I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Mrs. Caldwell? The voice was female, youngish, uncertain. Yes, this is Carol Jensen. Please don't hang up. Every muscle in my body tensed. Why are you calling me? There was a long pause filled with what sounded like traffic noise. Carol was calling from outside somewhere, maybe from her car. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. I need to apologize to you, and I need to tell you some things about what really happened. I should have hung up. Rebecca would have told me to hang up immediately, that anything Carol said could complicate the legal situation. But curiosity and the faint hope of understanding kept me on the line. I'm listening. What I did was wrong. Carol's words came out in a rush, as if she'd been rehearsing them but now needed to get them out before she lost courage. I knew it was wrong while I was doing it, but your daughter, she was very persuasive. And she was paying me 3 times what I normally make. How much? I asked, curious despite myself. $1,500 a week. Cash. Plus a bonus of $5,000 if I gathered enough evidence to support a competency hearing. My stomach turned. Vanessa had spent $6,000 in just 3 weeks buying surveillance of her own mother. That kind of money suggested how desperate she'd been. How much pressure she was under from her debts. What kind of evidence was she looking for? Everything. Carol's voice dropped lower. Medication errors, forgotten appointments, signs of confusion or memory loss. Anything that could suggest you weren't capable of living independently. She gave me a whole list of things to watch for and document. And did you find any of that evidence? The pause that followed was telling. No. That was the problem. You were completely fine, Mrs. Caldwell. Sharp as anyone I've ever worked with, organized, capable. You didn't forget things or mix up medications or show any signs of cognitive decline. I told your daughter that in my first week report and she got angry. Said I wasn't looking hard enough. So she told you to manufacture evidence? Not exactly, but sort of. She suggested I might be missing subtle signs, that I should document everything and let her interpret whether it was significant. She wanted photos of your medication cabinet, your calendar, your mail, anything that might show a pattern of decline even if I couldn't see it. I felt sick. Vanessa had been so determined to prove me incompetent that she'd pushed Carol to find problems that didn't exist, to interpret normal aging behaviors as signs of decline, to build a false narrative of a woman who couldn't care for herself. The cameras, I said. Were those your idea or hers? Hers. She had them installed before I even started. She gave me the company she used, some private security firm that specializes in covert surveillance. I wasn't supposed to tell you they existed, obviously. The whole point was to capture your daily life without you knowing you were being watched. Why are you telling me this now? Carol was quiet for so long I thought she might have hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and ashamed. Because I have a mother too. She's 78, lives alone, fiercely independent just like you. If someone did to her what I did to you, I'd want to kill them. I've been thinking about that ever since you threw me out. What if someone treated my mom this way? How would I feel? You'd feel betrayed, I said quietly. Violated. Like you couldn't trust anyone anymore. Yes. And I did that to you for money. I convinced myself it was okay because your daughter framed it as concern for your safety, but I knew deep down it was wrong. I should have refused the job. I should have reported her to Adult Protective Services. Instead, I took her money and violated your privacy for 3 weeks. I didn't know what to say. Part of me appreciated the apology, the honesty, the obvious remorse. But another part of me remained angry at this woman who'd entered my home under false pretenses and helped my daughter build a case against me. Are you willing to testify about this? I asked. To tell the police what you just told me? Yes. I already gave a statement this afternoon after Detective Okonkwo contacted me. I told her everything, including the payments, the instructions from your daughter, the pressure to find evidence that didn't exist. I'm probably going to lose my nursing license, but that's what I deserve. After Carol hung up, I sat in my hotel room feeling strangely hollow. I had confirmation now of everything I'd suspected and more. Vanessa hadn't just been overly concerned, she'd been actively conspiring to have me declared incompetent for financial gain. She'd hired help to manufacture evidence, installed illegal surveillance, and paid significant money to make it all happen. The premeditation of it was almost worse than the act itself. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I kept thinking about the 7-year-old girl who'd come into my life so many years ago, who'd eventually called me mom even though I wasn't her biological mother, who'd graduated law school with honors and made me so proud. When had that girl become the woman who could treat me with such calculated cruelty? Or had the capacity for that cruelty always been there, just waiting for the right circumstances to emerge? The next morning brought an unexpected phone call from Detective Okonkwo. Mrs. Caldwell, she said, I wanted to update you on the investigation. We've interviewed Carol Jensen. obtained her phone records showing extensive communication with your daughter, and subpoenaed your daughter's financial records. The evidence is quite damning. What happens now? The district attorney will review the case and decide whether to file charges. Based on what we've found, I expect they'll pursue charges for illegal surveillance, attempted financial exploitation, and possibly conspiracy. Your daughter could face significant prison time if convicted. Prison. The word hit me like a physical blow. Despite everything Vanessa had done, despite the cameras and the lies and the scheme to steal my house, the thought of her going to prison made me feel ill. She was still my daughter in every way that mattered, still the person I'd raised and loved for 35 years. How long before they decide? I asked. Probably a few weeks. In the meantime, I'd suggest you take some precautions. Your daughter might try to contact you, to persuade you to drop the charges or change your story. Any such contact could be considered witness intimidation. So please document everything and don't meet with her without your attorney present. I thanked Detective Okonkwo and ended the call feeling more conflicted than ever. Part of me wanted justice, wanted Vanessa to face real consequences for what she'd done. But another part, the part that had wiped her tears and celebrated her victories and loved her despite our complicated relationship, just wanted this nightmare to be over. The hotel room was becoming oppressive. I'd been hiding there for over a week, living out of a suitcase, eating takeout, avoiding my real life. But my house, my beautiful Victorian that Daniel and I had poured so much love into, didn't feel safe anymore. Vanessa had her key. She knew the alarm code. For all I knew, there were more cameras I hadn't found, more violations of my privacy waiting to be discovered. Rebecca called that afternoon with a suggestion. Mrs. Caldwell, I've been thinking about your living situation. Staying in that hotel isn't sustainable long-term, but I understand your reluctance to return home. Have you considered a short-term rental while we sort out the legal issues? I hadn't, but it made sense. Something temporary and anonymous where Vanessa couldn't find me, where I could have some space and privacy without the constant reminder of betrayal hanging over me. Rebecca helped me find a furnished apartment above a bookstore in a quiet neighborhood 20 minutes from my house. It was small but charming, with hardwood floors and tall windows that let in afternoon light, and bookshelves built into every available wall. The owner, a woman named Helen Chun who ran the bookstore below, asked no questions when I paid 3 months' rent in advance and moved in with nothing but a suitcase and a box of books I'd retrieved from storage. Living above a bookstore felt like coming home. The smell of old paper and coffee from the shop below, the quiet sounds of customers browsing, the sense of being surrounded by stories and ideas, it all brought me a peace I hadn't felt since before the cameras. Helen was a widow too, probably in her mid-60s, who'd turned her love of literature into a business after her husband died. We didn't talk much at first, just exchanged pleasantries when I came down to browse or get coffee from the small cafe she'd set up in one corner. But gradually, over shared cups of tea and conversations about books we'd loved, a friendship began to form. I didn't tell her about Vanessa or the surveillance or the legal case building against my daughter. I just existed as Patricia, a woman who loved literature and needed some temporary space. The simplicity of it was healing. 3 weeks after the confrontation in Rebecca's office, Detective Okonkwo called with news. The district attorney was filing charges against Vanessa for felony counts including illegal surveillance, attempted financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, conspiracy, and witness tampering after they discovered she'd contacted Carol multiple times trying to convince her to change her statement. The arraignment is scheduled for next month, Detective Okonkwo said. You'll likely be called to testify at some point. Are you prepared for that? I don't know, I admitted. She's my daughter. I understand this is difficult. But what she did was serious, and she needs to be held accountable. Not just for your sake, but for other elderly people whose children might try something similar. She was right, I knew. This wasn't just about me and Vanessa anymore. It was about standing up for all the seniors who were violated by their own families, who were told their discomfort with surveillance and control was unreasonable, who were gaslit into questioning their own perceptions. That evening, I sat in my apartment above the bookstore and wrote a letter I'd been composing in my head for weeks. Not to Vanessa, but to Daniel. I knew he couldn't read it. Knew he'd been gone for 6 years and whatever happened now was beyond his ability to influence. But I needed to tell him what had happened, Needed to process my feelings by writing to the person who'd always understood me best. "Dear Daniel," I wrote, "our daughter tried to have me declared incompetent so she could sell our house and pay off her debts. She put cameras in our bedroom, Daniel. In the room where we shared our most intimate moments, where you died in my arms, where I've grieved you every day since. She watched me there without my knowledge or consent, looking for evidence that I was too confused to live independently." The tears came then, falling onto the paper and smudging the ink. I kept writing anyway, telling Daniel about the discovery, the confrontation, the legal case, the weight of loving someone who'd hurt me so deeply. I wrote until my hand cramped and the light outside faded to darkness, purging all the pain and betrayal onto pages that no one else would ever read. When I finished, I felt lighter somehow. The act of articulating everything to Daniel, even though he couldn't answer, had helped me process the enormity of what had happened. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the box where I kept his wedding ring, his favorite book, and the last birthday card he'd given me. Artifacts of a love that had been real and honest and built on mutual respect. Everything my relationship with Vanessa had failed to be. A knock on my door startled me out of my thoughts. Helen stood in the hallway holding a plate covered with aluminum foil. "I made too much lasagna," she said with a smile that suggested this was probably not true. "Thought you might like some." I invited her in, grateful for the company and the kindness. We ate together at my small kitchen table, talking about books in Portland and the quirks of living above a retail space. She didn't ask why I was living there or where I'd come from, and I appreciated the lack of questions more than I could say. As Helen was leaving, she paused at the door. "Whatever you're going through," she said quietly, "I hope you know you're not alone. Sometimes we need space to figure things out, but isolation isn't the same as solitude. Don't forget that." After she left, I sat in the warm glow of her kindness and realized something important. Vanessa's betrayal had made me feel like I couldn't trust anyone, like every offer of help might be manipulation in disguise. But Helen's simple gesture of sharing food, Carol's eventual honesty about her role in the surveillance, Rebecca's fierce advocacy, these were reminders that not everyone was cruel or self-serving. Most people, in fact, were fundamentally decent when given the chance to be. The question was whether I could learn to trust again after everything that had happened. Whether I could open myself to friendship and connection knowing how badly those things could hurt when they were violated. Whether I could rebuild a life that felt safe and meaningful after my daughter had torn down everything I thought was secure. I didn't have answers yet. But sitting in my small apartment above a bookstore, surrounded by the smell of old books and the memory of Helen's kindness, I thought maybe I could start trying. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late September. I dressed carefully that day, choosing a simple navy dress and low heels, wanting to look competent and clear-headed for the judge who would decide if there was enough evidence to proceed to trial. Rebecca met me outside the courthouse, her expression serious but encouraging. "Your daughter will be here with her attorney," she warned me. "Try not to engage with her directly. Let me handle any communication." Inside the courtroom, I saw Vanessa for the first time since our meeting in Rebecca's office. She sat at the defense table with a lawyer I didn't recognize, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit who leaned close to whisper in her ear. She looked thinner than I remembered, her face drawn and tired despite perfectly applied makeup. When our eyes met across the courtroom, I saw fear there and regret, and anger all mixed together in a way that made my chest ache. The hearing itself was brief and procedural. The prosecutor presented evidence. Carol testified about the surveillance scheme. Financial records were introduced showing Vanessa's debts and the payments to Carol. Through it all, I sat in the gallery with Rebecca beside me, watching as my daughter's carefully constructed life was dismantled in legal terms and official documents. The judge, an older woman with steel gray hair and shrewd eyes, listened carefully to everything presented. When the prosecutor finished, she looked down at her notes for a long moment before speaking. "I find sufficient evidence to proceed to trial on all counts. The defendant is remanded on her own recognizance with conditions including no contact with the victim and surrender of passport. Trial date to be set." The gavel came down, final and absolute. Vanessa would stand trial for what she'd done to me. As people filed out of the courtroom, Vanessa approached me despite her lawyer's obvious attempt to stop her. She looked desperate, her composure completely shattered. "Mom, please," she said, her voice breaking. "We need to talk." I know I made mistakes, but sending me to prison won't fix anything. Rebecca stepped between us immediately. Miss Caldwell, you're violating the no-contact order. Step back now. I just need 5 minutes. Just let me explain. But I'd heard all her explanations. The supposed concern for my safety that was really about financial desperation. The surveillance that was supposed to protect me but really documented my competence to undermine it. The love that came with conditions and calculations and ultimately betrayed everything it claimed to be. There's nothing more to say, Vanessa, I told her quietly. You made your choices. Now you have to live with the consequences. Her face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. I'm your daughter. Doesn't that mean anything? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with all the years of complicated love and gradual resentment and ultimate betrayal. Did being my daughter mean something? Yes, of course it did. It meant the betrayal hurt more, cut deeper, left scars that would probably never fully heal. But it didn't mean I had to let her escape accountability for what she'd done. You'll always be my daughter, I said. But that doesn't mean I have to accept being victimized by you. Rebecca guided me away before Vanessa could respond. Behind me, I heard her sobbing, her lawyer's stern voice reminding her about the no-contact order. I didn't look back. Outside the courthouse, I stood in the autumn sunshine and took a deep breath. The preliminary hearing was over. The trial would come eventually, months from now probably, and I'd have to face Vanessa again in a more formal setting. But for now I'd done what I needed to do. I'd stood up for myself, refused to be manipulated, and demanded accountability for the violation of my rights. I didn't feel triumphant exactly. There was too much sadness mixed with the sense of justice for triumph. But it felt necessary, like a wound that needed to be cleaned before it could heal properly. Rebecca drove me back to the bookstore apartment, talking about next steps in legal strategy. I listened with half an ear, my mind still processing everything I'd seen in that courtroom. Vanessa's fear and desperation. The cold legal language used to describe what she'd done to me. The judge's matter-of-fact determination that yes, a crime had been committed and yes, there would be consequences. As I climbed the stairs to my apartment, I felt the weight of the day settling into my bones. I was tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion and everything to do with emotional exhaustion. I made myself tea and sat by the window watching the street below, people walking past the bookstore going about their normal lives, unaware of the small drama that had played out in the courthouse that morning. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Despite Rebecca's warnings about contact, I opened it. I'm sorry, Mom, for everything. I know I can't take it back, but I need you to know I never meant to hurt you. I was just so scared of losing everything, and I made terrible choices. I love you. I've always loved you. Please believe that. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to believe it, wanted to think that somewhere underneath the surveillance and the lies and the scheme to steal my house, there was genuine love. But love didn't treat people the way Vanessa had treated me. Love didn't violate privacy and manipulate reality and prioritize money over basic human dignity. Whatever Vanessa felt for me, it wasn't the kind of love I needed or deserved. I deleted the message without responding and blocked the number. Then I made myself dinner. A simple pasta with vegetables from the farmer's market Helen had told me about. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, reclaiming the simple pleasure of nourishing myself without cameras watching or daughter judging or anyone interpreting my behaviors as signs of decline. This was my life now. Small apartment, simple routines, careful boundaries. It wasn't the life I'd imagined when Daniel and I renovated that Victorian house, but it was honest and it was mine. No one was watching me. No one was building a case against my competence. No one was plotting to take away my autonomy. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. The trial began on a cold morning in February, almost 7 months after I'd discovered the cameras in my home. I'd spent those months living above Helen's bookstore, building a quiet life that belonged entirely to me. I'd started volunteering at the literacy center again, reconnected with friends who disappeared during my marriage to comfort me after Daniel's death, but whom I'd pushed away in my grief, and slowly learned to trust my own judgment again. Rebecca had prepared me thoroughly for testimony, walking me through the questions the prosecutor would ask and warning me about the defense attorney's likely strategies. They'll try to paint you as confused or vindictive, she'd said. They'll suggest you misunderstood your daughter's intentions. Stay calm, stick to the facts, and don't let them rattle you. The courtroom was more crowded than I'd expected. Vanessa sat at the defense table looking smaller somehow, diminished by the proceedings. Trevor wasn't there. I'd heard through Rebecca that they were divorcing, that he distanced himself from Vanessa's legal troubles to protect his own reputation and finances. So much for standing by your spouse in difficult times. My testimony lasted 3 hours. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Linda Graves, guided me through the discovery of the cameras, Carol's suspicious behavior, the confrontation with Vanessa, and the revelation about her financial motives. I spoke clearly and calmly, describing exactly what had happened without embellishment or drama. The facts were damning enough without me adding emotional weight. Vanessa's attorney, Mr. Brennan, was as aggressive as Rebecca had predicted. He suggested I'd overreacted to reasonable safety measures, that I'd misinterpreted my daughter's genuine concern as malice, that perhaps my memory of events wasn't entirely reliable given my age and medical history. Each question was designed to undermine my credibility, to plant doubt about whether I was a reliable narrator of my own experience. But I'd spent 40 years teaching critical thinking and analyzing unreliable narrators in literature. I knew the techniques he was using, and I refused to be manipulated by them. When he suggested my stroke had affected my judgment, I calmly listed every medication I took, every doctor's appointment I'd kept, every bill I'd paid on time. When he implied I was vindictive toward Vanessa for personal reasons, I explained that I'd have preferred never to see the inside of a courtroom if it meant my daughter hadn't violated my basic rights as a human being. By the time I stepped down from the witness stand, I could see from the jury's faces that they believed me. Not because I'd performed well or said the right things, but because I'd told the truth plainly and let it speak for itself. Carol testified next, describing in detail the payments Vanessa had made, the instructions she'd received to document everything, and the pressure to find evidence of incompetence that didn't exist. Her testimony was particularly damaging because she had no reason to lie, nothing to gain from helping the prosecution. If anything, her honesty was costing her professionally. The financial records told their own story. Vanessa's mounting debts, the payments to the surveillance company, the cash withdrawals that matched Carol's compensation. The prosecution built a methodical case showing premeditation, financial motive, and deliberate violation of privacy laws. When Vanessa took the stand in her own defense, I saw her try to reclaim the composed attorney persona she'd worn for so many years. She admitted to the surveillance but framed it entirely as concern for my safety. She acknowledged her financial problems, but insisted they hadn't influenced her decisions about my care. She cried when describing finding me unconscious in the garden, making it sound like a trauma that justified everything that followed. But under cross-examination, Linda Graves dismantled her narrative piece by piece. If you were truly concerned about safety, why didn't you discuss the cameras with your mother first? If finances weren't a factor, why did you tell Carol you needed evidence for a competency hearing? If you respected your mother's autonomy, why did you pressure her to move into assisted living before giving her any chance to prove she could manage with minimal support? Vanessa had no good answers. Her testimony revealed what I'd known all along, that beneath the concern and the tears was a calculated scheme born of desperation and entitlement. She'd convinced herself that my house was rightfully hers to claim, that my independence was less important than her financial stability, that she had the right to make decisions about my life without my consent. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the forewoman read the verdict in a steady voice that seemed to echo in the suddenly silent courtroom. Guilty on all counts. Vanessa's face crumpled. Her attorney put a hand on her shoulder, but she shook it off, turning to look at me with an expression of such pure devastation that I almost looked away. Almost, but not quite. She needed to see that I wasn't going to rescue her from the consequences of her choices, wasn't going to forgive her just because the reality of accountability had finally arrived. The judge scheduled sentencing for 3 weeks later. As the bailiff led Vanessa away, she looked back one more time, mouthing words I couldn't quite make out. I'm sorry maybe, or please help, or some combination of desperation and regret. I sat perfectly still and watched her disappear through the door that led to the holding cells. Rebecca squeezed my hand. You did the right thing, she said quietly. I know it doesn't feel good, but you did the right thing. Outside the courthouse, Detective Okonkwo was waiting with news. I thought you'd want to know that 2 other women have come forward since your case went public. Elderly mothers whose children installed surveillance under the guise of safety concerns. Your willingness to prosecute gave them courage to speak up about their own situations. So some good had come from this nightmare after all. My pain had purpose beyond my own healing. It had opened doors for others to seek justice, to refuse to accept violation as the price of family relationships, to demand the respect they deserved regardless of age. The sentencing hearing was brief. The judge had clearly given considerable thought to the appropriate punishment. She spoke about the special trust that exists between parents and children, about how violations of that trust by adult children against vulnerable parents strike at the heart of family bonds and social stability. She acknowledged Vanessa's lack of prior criminal record and her expressions of remorse, but emphasized that the premeditation and financial motive couldn't be overlooked. 3 years in prison with possibility of parole after 18 months. Additional restitution for my legal fees and the costs of temporary housing. Mandatory counseling. And a permanent restraining order preventing any contact without my explicit written consent. Vanessa sobbed as the sentence was read, her attorney's arm around her shoulders. I sat with Rebecca and felt nothing but a vast emptiness where my daughter used to be. After the sentencing, I went back to my apartment above the bookstore and slept for 14 hours straight. When I woke, it was to sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of fresh coffee from Helen's shop below. I got up slowly, made myself breakfast, and sat by the window watching the neighborhood come alive with the ordinary business of a Saturday morning. It was over. The surveillance, the legal case, the painful process of holding my daughter accountable, all of it was finally over. Vanessa would go to prison, I would continue building my independent life, and whatever relationship we might have in the future would be built on different terms entirely, if it existed at all. 3 months later, I received a letter from Vanessa. It had been forwarded through Rebecca, since the restraining order prohibited direct contact. I almost didn't open it, almost threw it away unopened. But curiosity and the faint stubborn hope that never quite dies won out. The letter was short, written in Vanessa's careful handwriting. Mom, it began. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I've forgiven myself. But I need you to know that I understand now what I did to you and why it was unforgivable. Prison has given me time to think about who I became and how I justified treating you so terribly. I was wrong. About everything. You deserved respect and honesty and love that didn't come with conditions. I'm sorry I couldn't give you that. I hope you're happy. I hope you found peace. You deserve both. There was no request to write back. No plea for reconciliation. Just an acknowledgement and an apology. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in the box with my letter to Daniel and the other artifacts of my old life. Maybe someday I'd be ready to forgive Vanessa. Maybe not. But for now, I was focused on building the life I deserved rather than mourning the relationship that had betrayed me. A year after the trial, I moved back into my Victorian house. Rebecca had helped me change all the locks, update the security system, and conduct a thorough sweep for any remaining surveillance devices. The house felt different now, both familiar and strange, like visiting a place you used to live rather than coming home. But slowly, room by room, I reclaimed it. I redecorated the bedroom where the camera had been, painting the walls a warm yellow that reminded me of sunshine. I turned Daniel's library into an office where I volunteered with the Literacy Center's online tutoring program. I planted new roses in the garden where I'd collapsed, stronger varieties that bloomed twice a year. Helen became my closest friend, stopping by for tea and book discussions and the kind of easy companionship that requires no performance or pretense. I reconnected with colleagues from the university, joined a book club, started taking watercolor classes. I built a life that was mine, chosen deliberately rather than drifted into, protected fiercely rather than taken for granted. Sometimes I thought about Vanessa in prison, wondered what she was thinking, whether she truly learned anything or was simply serving her time and planning her next move. But those thoughts grew less frequent as my own life filled with meaning and connection, and the quiet satisfaction of autonomy respected and independence earned. One evening, sitting on my porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, I realized I'd forgiven myself. Not for anything I'd done wrong, but for trusting someone who'd betrayed that trust, for not seeing the warning signs earlier, for the complicated love I still felt despite everything. Self-forgiveness, I discovered, was harder than forgiving others and more essential to healing. My daughter had tried to steal my house, my independence, and my dignity. She'd failed. Not because I was particularly strong or brave, but because I'd refused to accept her version of reality, refused to let fear or obligation override my own perceptions, refused to believe that being elderly meant surrendering my right to autonomy. The cameras were gone. The surveillance had ended. The trial was over. And I was still here, still independent, still building a life worth living. That was victory enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.